Good evening and thanks for joining us. The top stories today. To bring jobs back to America, Joe Biden proposes taxing companies that send jobs overseas. New York City's comptroller is running for mayor. He wants to tax the rich to fix the city's $4 billion budget hole. The UK government is forcing all pubs and restaurants to use contact tracing. We speak to an industry association to see how it works. And the Senate could vote on a smaller stimulus package as early as this week. Senate Republicans unveiled their new package on Tuesday. Wall Street snapped a three-session losing skid with tech stocks on the move again. The S&P's tech sector notched its biggest one-day percentage gain since April. Tesla shares rebounded after suffering their biggest one-day percentage drop on Tuesday. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon each rose by at least 3%. The Dow rose nearly 444 points or 1.6%. S&P 500 gained over 67 points or 2.01%. And the Nasdaq added nearly 294 points or 2.71%. And Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden unveiled his plan to fight the offshoring of jobs. He says he'll do it through incentives and penalties. He's in the battleground state of Michigan today. Biden's offshoring tax penalty would amount to taxing profits from products that are made overseas at over 30%. The former vice president earlier floated the idea of raising the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. As an incentive to reshore or bring jobs back, Biden would give a 10% tax credit for companies that reopen facilities that have been shut down or are closing. Other corporate actions that will qualify for an incentive include expanding domestic manufacturing payroll and updating plans to improve competitiveness and boost employment in manufacturing. And the new report says the disruption to schooling and the skills lost because of it could result in a 1.5% drop in global GDP for the rest of the century.
The OECD estimates for the United States that'll represent an economic loss of $15.3 trillion. And the bill could be even higher if disruption to education extends into the next academic year. The report explains that learning loss will lead to skill loss, and that will reduce worker productivity and result in lower economic output.
For all of the sectors important for our economy, for its restarting, and for the future of nations, schools have to fulfill a complex equation, that of welcoming everyone, all while guaranteeing everyone's safety.
Governments around the world closed schools to control the virus. That's posed a challenge to teachers who had to adopt a new way of teaching. Even as schools in many countries reopen, big challenges remain, as schools must navigate how to reopen without causing a new spike in infections. The report says with economies contracting, there's also the risk of a shrinking education budget.
And taxpayers beware, major U.S. airlines are looking for more federal aid. They say business will only pick up after a widespread CCP virus vaccine arrives. Airlines already received $25 billion in payroll grants under the CARES Act in March, but they've been lobbying for a 6-month extension. Tens of thousands of jobs are at risk when the money runs out this month. Union leaders met with members of Congress to discuss a second round of aid yesterday. It's not clear whether an agreement can be reached in time. The largest carriers each burn through around $1 billion of cash each month. And it's not just the airline industry. Amtrak Chief Executive William Flynn told Congress the U.S. passenger railroad needs almost $5 billion in government aid. He said the money will help avoid service and job cuts and address mounting losses. He said without additional government assistance, the company would have to make more drastic cuts to avoid bankruptcy. Amtrak will temporarily reduce service on most long-distance routes. It's already made cuts to other services. The company said it would have to furlough more than 2,000 workers or 10% of its staff as a result of the steep decline in travel. Ridership and revenue levels are down 95% year over year. Amtrak employs about 20,000 workers. And the Senate is preparing to vote on a new virus measure as soon as this week. Senate Republicans unveiled a slimmed-down CCP virus bill on Tuesday.
Today, we're releasing a targeted proposal that focuses on several of the most urgent aspects of this crisis.
The Senate unveiling a newly constructed, scaled-down stimulus bill for Americans struggling during the pandemic, which would be paid for in part by unspent money in the existing CARES Act and includes proposals for an extra $300 in weekly unemployment benefits, cut in half from the weekly $600, which expired in July. 2 years of tax credits for parents to cover costs of private and homeschooling, and an extension of the Paycheck Protection Program to the tune of nearly $258 billion, just to name a few.
We're going to get the stonewalling of Democratic leaders out from behind closed doors and put this to a vote out here on the floor.
Senators expecting to bring the aid package to a vote on Thursday, but it's not expected to get the 60 votes it needs to send it to the House, where it's already facing opposition.
New York City's comptroller has launched his campaign to become mayor. At an Upper Manhattan event, he proposed taxing the rich even more to reduce the city's budget deficit. It's currently in the billions of dollars. NTD's Phil Zoe reports.
New York City Comptroller Scott Stringer is running for mayor. He promises to reduce the city's $4 billion budget deficit by taxing the rich.
And we will ask the most fortunate to pay a bit more in taxes. And I want to be clear, I don't want any New Yorker to leave.
We asked New Yorkers if they support the idea. One person says the next mayor and the wealthy should negotiate with each other.
We should work it out because they all depend on each other. Because you can, without the rich, without the politicians, the city is going to collapse.
Another person says people are leaving the city anyway.
Wealthy people leave anyway because you know what? They have their little house and have their yacht, they have their private islands, so they don't care. It moves on.
She says the current mayor did not do a good job handling the pandemic. Stringer served in the state assembly for over a decade. He also served as the Manhattan Borough president. Current New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio is term limited and won't be running for re-election. Phil Zoe, NTD News, New York.
The Bank of England's top economist is supporting the government's plan to end the wage support program. He said their job as policymakers is to make the adjustment as seamless and painless as possible.
The Bank of England's chief economist Andy Haldane is in favour of ending the UK's furlough scheme. He suggests letting pay levels and working hours adjust to the market. He said more flexible working arrangements may protect against job losses, indicating that some would be working less hours. The UK has seen debt balloon to a record $2.6 trillion. Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak, is keen to stop the expense. The move could set off shockwaves that would mean pay cuts and job losses. Haldane said keeping all those jobs on life support is in some ways prolonging the inevitable, saying it doesn't help either the individual or the business. He added that businesses would likely require help to manage their debt burdens that have piled up during the pandemic. Government data obtained by the BBC says in June and July alone, British employers planned over 300,000 redundancies. And despite the furlough scheme, employment declined during the second quarter to an extent not seen since the global financial crisis. The UK's furlough scheme is set to end on October 31st, with the Bank of England forecasting a potential doubling of unemployment to 7.5%.
And the UK government is tightening social distancing rules because of a new spike in cases. It's now forcing pubs and restaurants to use contact tracing to help contain the spread.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced new rules that will require all indoor dining and drinking establishments to keep track of their customers. We spoke with Nationwide Caterers Association Director Mark Lorry to get his view.
I think that the change now that's coming in is for specifically for pubs, where there have been some rowdy incidents around the country and distancing hasn't been maintained.
He said most restaurant and bar groups were already requiring people to book tables for contact tracing, but pubs have struggled to implement it since it's more of a walk-in trade. He said the changes were predicated on the fact that the government would have a working track and trace app, but he says the app hasn't done too well in pubs or on a national scale.
So I think that it kind of needed that leadership from government, which hopefully now we are getting, to say, look, this is how you do it.
The new rules also prohibit gatherings of more than 6 people starting next Monday. He says he thinks it was difficult for police to carry out the policy previously.
Like that, and I just think that they'd have ended up in conversations that were difficult, that made it very difficult for them to do their job.
He also said that the government previously introduced a track and trace app, but after doing a pilot scheme in the Isle of Wight, the app was ditched. It looks like the National Health Service's track and trace app still may not be ready in 5 days when the new rules come into effect. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
And still to come, Louis Vuitton terminates its planned takeover of Tiffany. The deal was agreed to before the pandemic. Now they're wondering if the price was too high. And Volkswagen's new car meets with a cold reception. Was hoping the car could beat Tesla, but an influential auto magazine says it's not up to standard. That and more after the break. Researchers have hit the pause button on a CCP virus vaccine trial. The drug giant Astrazeneca says it stopped global trials after one volunteer in Britain suffered an unexplained illness. The company said it's a standard precaution. The so-called Oxford vaccine was developed with Britain's University of Oxford in the United States, along with several other countries. Astrazeneca says independent experts will now review the data before trials can resume. The Oxford vaccine is one of 3 virus vaccines in late-stage Phase 3 trials here in the U.S. And Louis Vuitton has abandoned its $16 billion takeover of Tiffany. The deal lost its appeal in the wake of the pandemic. Now the U.S. jeweler is suing to force it through.
LVMH says it's dropping its planned $16 billion takeover of U.S. jeweler Tiffany. The deal would have been the biggest ever in the luxury industry and was agreed before the global health crisis. But with sales in the sector hit hard this year, questions were raised over whether the merger was overpriced. LVMH said it had received a letter from the French Foreign Ministry asking it to delay the takeover due to the threat of more US tariffs against French products. The Louis Vuitton owner also said Tiffany had asked to postpone the deal beyond the November 24th headline, which it was not willing to do. The stage is now set for a dispute between the luxury giants. Tiffany said it was filing a lawsuit to force the French group to go through with the deal as agreed last year. The US company has accused LVMH of purposely stalling completion of the takeover. It rejected suggestions that it had breached the terms of the deal.
And 3 Republican senators have introduced a bill to reform U.S. tech's liability shield. They want to change a federal law that largely exempts social media platforms from taking responsibility for what their users post. There are mounting calls to reform Section 230 of the 1996 Communications Decency Act. Lawmakers have complained about big tech taking down certain posts, and the immunity these companies enjoy has come under intense scrutiny. President Trump signed an executive order in May backing legislation to scrap or weaken Section 230. Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker said social media platforms have hidden behind these protections for too long in order to censor content that goes against their beliefs. There are several other similar bills doing the rounds, including another bipartisan bill by Senator Lindsey Graham. And Apple has filed counterclaims against Fortnite creator Epic Games. It's asking for lost App Store fees and in order to stop Epic from using its own in-app payment system.
Apple has opened up a new front in its legal battles with Epic Games, the maker of popular shooter game Fortnite. On Tuesday, the tech giant fired off counterclaims against Epic, asking for lost fees on its App Store and other damages. The 2 companies have been locked in a legal fight since August. That's when Epic launched its own payment system within the Fortnite game app to circumvent what it calls Apple's monopolistic practices. The App Store requires developers to use Apple's payment system and pay a 30% commission. In response, Apple blocked Epic's ability to send out updates or put new apps through the App Store. And Epic sued Apple, alleging that its App Store practices violate antitrust laws. But the court has allowed the existing version of Fortnite to work on phones as well as the new payment system as the case plays out. Apple has said it would allow Fortnite back into the store if Epic removed the direct payment feature, but Epic has refused, saying complying with Apple's request would be, quote, to collude with Apple to maintain their monopoly over in-app payments on iOS. Apple did not specify how much money it was seeking in its countersuit.
Volkswagen hopes its ID3 hatchback will be the car to beat Tesla. But Germany's most influential testing publication says the new vehicles just aren't up to VW's usual standards.
Volkswagen hopes it's the car to beat Tesla. The ID3 hatchback is so important to the firm, German Chancellor Angela Merkel turned up to launch production. But the vehicle has been given a cold reception at home. Germany's most influential testing publication says the ID3 isn't up to VW's usual standards. Auto, Motor und Sport said the inside of the hood looked like it was painted with a spray can. It slated uneven panel gaps, an infotainment system that takes ages to fire up, and satellite navigation that fails to work. The range is disappointing too, it says. Now the tough review comes after VW's Labour chief criticised the electric vehicle programme for falling behind schedule. The company in March rejected that criticism, but admitted that the cars needed last-minute improvements. The Volkswagen Group, which also includes brands like Audi, Porsche and Skoda, plans to launch 75 electric cars by 2029. Analysts and car buyers will be watching to see if future reviews are any better.
And still to come, British soccer star David Beckham is listing his company on the London Stock Exchange. It'll be the first esports company to go public in the UK. And motorhome sales and rentals have surged during the pandemic. The vehicles offer socially distanced vacation options. More on that after the break. David Beckham's Guild Esports plan to list in London this year. It'll be the first esports enterprise to go public in Britain.
David Beckham is set to make his debut on the London Stock Exchange, or at least his esports company is. The soccer star is planning an IPO for Guild Esports, which owns and develops gaming teams. A Reuters source says it will list about 40% of its shares, with a view to raising £20 million, about $26 million. That's modest by stock exchange standards. But the deal would still be a milestone, marking the first time an esports company in the UK has listed on the London market. Global esports had revenue of $951 million in 2019 and 443 million viewers, according to analytics firm Newzoo. Guild says proceeds from the share sale will be used to recruit new players and invest in the brand.
And sales and rentals of motorhomes are soaring this summer in the UK. The oversized vehicles allow for social distancing on vacation and even double as an office space while many continue working from home.
Parked in the English countryside, there's more to this motorhome than meets the eye. It has been described as the new business-class home office. The Glamper RV business line was conceived by managing director Lucy Caillet and her husband. It was designed with luxury in mind.
So the idea is to create something that's more akin with a sort of private jet, luxury yacht, than the classic kind of motorhome, which perhaps doesn't have that same reputation for luxury.
The Glamper RV comes with a large central desk, LED lighting, multiple USB charging points, and mobile Wi-Fi, complete with luxury furnishings. Interest in the Glamper RV surged during the UK's pandemic lockdown. Its website saw an over 500% increase in new users visiting the site this July, compared to July 2019. There was also a nearly 1,000% increase in page visits.
People can go away, they can be socially distant, they can be isolated, they can also work from their holiday or from their motorhome, so it really ticks all the boxes.
The 2020 Glamper RV costs $120,000. A one-week rental during peak season costs about $2,000. But the vintage Volkswagen camper van is still in style. In London, artist Sue Seven has taken a creative and eco-friendly approach to her vintage VW. Seven says she used recycled foam and fabric to refurbish her VW. She also installed a solar panel on the roof for power. It even has a living garden inside.
When we were driving around, I had a garden that we started creating as we were driving. So we would find little succulents on the way, and you put it in a little bit of soil and they just start to grow.
The vehicle has given Seven a sense of freedom during the pandemic.
It was very nice. We could drive to the forest, or we could drive to the beach, and we wouldn't be near anybody at all. We could keep to ourselves but still be in our own little lockdown in the van, essentially.
She calls her 1983 VW Transporter Caravelle the Purple Emporium.
That's the latest business updates for today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.